What's up, guys? I hope you all are having a blessed day today. So, for today's topic, I really wanted to kind of talk about loneliness because I feel like that is something that really, affected me a lot in the past year while, growing with God. And one thing nobody really kind of talks about when they talk about, I feel like that healing aspect of the journey is how lonely that part can feel a lot of the time because people talk about breakthrough, people talk about, finding your purpose and all that, and they talk about transformation. But I feel like at the same time, nobody talks about the space, between who you were and who you're becoming now. And sometimes that's like, I feel like the loneliest place you'll ever be really in your life because you're not who you used to be anymore, but you're still like not who you're becoming yet either and where you want to be yet either. And you're somewhere in that kind of like just in between area. And if you ever felt like nobody understands what you're exactly carrying, that's what I want to talk about today. And so I think this is going to be a great video for anybody going through, something like that right now with isolation and loneliness. One of the hardest parts of growth isn't changing. It's realizing some of the things can't exactly come with you, those old habits, those old mindsets, old comforts, and sometimes even just old relationships. And that can really hurt, right? Because even unhealthy things can become familiar at times. And familiar feels safe, it feels comfortable. And there were seasons in my life where I knew God was asking me to move forward. I had so many things I had to let go of first that I had been kind of just leaning on for years, validation and reassurance from relationships, and just the need for approval from people. The need to always know what was going to happen next because I really had a hard time kind of handling the unknown and not being in control. And honestly, I didn't want to let a lot of those things go that were kind of hindering me because they felt safer than trusting God because it was just something that was just out of my, like something I could actually control, right? But growth always asks for something. It requires leaving usually something behind. Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. Isaiah 43:18. Sometimes God isn't trying to take something purposely away from you. He's trying to just make room for something better in your life. And so the best thing you can usually do is not consider that a loss, but rather space for what is actually going to help you in the long term. One thing I personally struggled with for years was also feeling very misunderstood. And I dealt with severe social anxiety most of my life. I talked about that a lot on this channel already. And one of the hardest parts wasn't even, really the anxiety itself. It was feeling like nobody really understood exactly what I was going through and what was happening. People would tell me, even parents, just go do it. What are you so afraid of? Just talk to people and just stop worrying so much. And if you ever struggled with anxiety like that, it's never that simple, right? I spent years hiding what I was going through because I didn't want people to really judge me for it or look at me in a different way because of it. It was very just embarrassing to me that I was a man going through something like that. And I was trying so hard to appear to be okay, trying to act so normal and trying to make sure nobody knew how much I was actually struggling and being affected by this thing. And eventually that isolation becomes exhausting, and it's because you're carrying a burden that nobody ever really sees because you're hiding it. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. Maybe nobody around you will ever fully understand what you're going through. But the thing I realize is you don't really need anybody to, right? Because God already does. Every fear, every thought, every tear at night, every silent battle you're going through, He sees all of it. And that should give you more peace than any person in this world ever could. One of the reasons I love Jesus so much is because he, I feel like, understands loneliness better than anybody. People forget that part a lot. Jesus was surrounded by crowds and was idolized by people, but at the same time, he still experienced loneliness. He was also misunderstood, rejected, and also abandoned. And even when it came to, his closest friends, they fell asleep when he needed them the most. Isn't that crazy? Matthew 26:40, Jesus asked, "Could you not watch with me 1 hour?" Imagine that, right? The Son of God asking his friends to stay awake for 1 hour, and they couldn't even do that. If Jesus experienced loneliness, you shouldn't be surprised when you do too in your life. Because loneliness isn't proof God abandoned you. Sometimes it's just proof you're walking a road that just requires faith. A lot of what pushed me toward God was loneliness in my life. And not success, not achievement, it was loneliness. And when my relationship ended, when my dad's health was declining and my family was just struggling, when job frustrations kept piling up, and when I just felt completely lost about my future in life, I started realizing something, that everything I had kind of built my security on was just shaking. And for the first time in my life, I had nowhere else to really look except up. And that's when my relationship with God really became real. Not because life got easier in any way, but because I finally stopped pretending I could handle everything myself. I stopped putting faith in people and started putting faith in God. And scripture says it is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in humans. Psalm 118:8. Think about how many people in scripture experience seasons of isolation, right? You had Moses, who spent years in the wilderness. You got Joseph, who spent years forgotten in a prison. Paul spent years before stepping into his ministry. Even Jesus spent 40 days alone in the wilderness as well. And why? Because isolation often becomes preparation, right? Because God does some of his deepest work in private. The problem is, though, we usually want public results without private formation. And scripture says, "But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door." Matthew 6:6. God often builds things in secret before he reveals them publicly. And so a lot of the time, isolation is actually a gift, because that's where God is finally making an impact on your life, when you have nobody else you can really rely on anymore but him. Something God has been teaching me, especially recently, is really this: loneliness and being alone aren't exactly the same thing. You can be surrounded by people and still feel very lonely, and you can be physically alone while still feeling completely connected to God. And so the goal isn't to never be alone. The goal is learning God's presence is enough, even when nobody else is really around you. And that's hard. It's definitely not easy. And I am still personally trying to learn that. But I think that's where I feel like real peace actually starts at the end of the day. And one thing I really also wish I understood sooner, and I feel like will bring you a lot of peace, is not every relationship is meant for every season. You got some people that are assignments. You got some people that are just meant there to be there for lessons. Some people are lifelong friends. And God has a way of bringing the right people into your life at the right time. And I've seen that happen, already personally. And through church, through people I've met just recently at work, and just through opportunities I never expected. And it reminds me that God isn't finished writing my story yet. Ecclesiastes 4:9-10. Two are better than one. God never intended us to do life completely alone. So although you might be in a season of isolation and loneliness right now, it won't always be like that. Right now, he is just shaking and forming you into the person you need to be for the people that he's going to bring when you finally do get out of this season, the people that you actually do need to help, and the testimonies you're going to tell that actually will impact people in the long run. And if you've been feeling lonely lately, and if you take anything really from this whole video, I feel like you should take this, is that loneliness doesn't mean you're ever forgotten. It doesn't mean you're also behind either. It doesn't mean God has left you or abandoned you. Sometimes it means you're just in that transition season, a season where God is teaching you to depend on Him before He brings in really that next chapter into your life. And one day, you're going to look back on all of this and realize that this season that felt the most lonely in your life was actually the season God was really the closest to you, and you're gonna thank Him for it later. In the next episode, I also really want to talk about something that I feel like almost everyone struggles with, but also tends to rarely admit at the same time: the need for really validation and reassurance, because that's something I really struggle with. For a lot of years, trying to earn worth from relationships and people, career success, and just other people's opinions. And when God has already given us, that identity from the beginning. So I feel like that'll be a very impactful one for a lot of people. That kind of also relates to this feeling of loneliness too. But if you made it this far, thank you guys for watching. It was a pleasure as always, and if you got something from this video, please leave a like and a comment. It really helps me out and helps to share this to whoever else needs it. And if you know somebody that's also struggling with the same thing like loneliness or isolation, please also share it to them. And I appreciate all the support, and I will see you guys in the next one. Have a blessed night.